On July 4th, 2026, the most immediate life-threatening hazard to the United States wasn't, a foreign adversary or some localized terror plot
Right.
or even a massive cyber attack. It was quite literally the air itself.
Yeah, it was really a scenario that played out in terrifying slow motion. I mean, by 3 a.m. on the morning of the 4th, the ambient temperature in downtown Washington, D.C. just stubbornly refused to drop below 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow, at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, the atmosphere was completely stagnant. It was heavy with moisture pulled straight from the Gulf of Mexico, and the heat index was already hovering near 90 before the sun even came up.
And, this was the morning of the semi-quincentennial, America's 250th birthday.
Right, a massive deal.
So you have an estimated 500,000 people, tourists from all over the world waking up in hotels or, already staking out spots on the National Mall.
Just waiting in the heat.
Yeah. And they are anticipating this historic celebration, right? Daytime parades, the Great American State Fair, presidential address, fireworks. But instead, they walked out into, a thermodynamic trap.
That's a good way to put it.
The nation's birthday party quietly, and then very suddenly turned into this massive triage operation.
Because we saw this fundamental collision between an immovable human cultural tradition, right, the outdoor summer holiday, and the relentless physics of the atmosphere.
Welcome to Meteorology Matters, the podcast that dives deep into the science, chaos, and stories behind the weather that shapes our world. This show was created by meteorologist Rob Jones.
And we really have an incredibly complex atmospheric event to unpack today.
We do. So our mission in this deep dive is to break down the meteorological mechanics of the historic July 2026 heat dome. We're going to explore those life-threatening conditions that basically evacuated the National Mall, unpack how weather misinformation spreads during high-stress extreme events, and look closely at how our infrastructure and our bodies adapt or, fail to adapt to these soaring temperatures.
Yeah, and to really understand the chaos on the ground that weekend, we have to start by looking about 30,000 feet up.
Okay, let's unpack this, because long before the parades were canceled and the trains were halted and the emergency rooms filled up, there was this massive atmospheric engine quietly assembling itself over the eastern two-thirds of the country.
Yes.
And I want to get right into the mechanics of that engine. Because the term heat dome, it gets thrown around in the media constantly now.
Oh, all the time.
It's become a bit of a buzzword, almost a catch-all phrase for any time it gets hot in July. But from a purely meteorological standpoint, we are talking about a very specific, very powerful physical mechanism here. What actually builds a heat dome?
So it begins with the jet stream. You can think of the jet stream as this high-altitude river of fast-moving air.
And that wind?
Yeah, that wind steers weather systems across the globe from west to east.
Right.
Normally, it undulates in a fairly progressive pattern, right, bringing this continuous cycle of high pressure, low pressure, warm fronts, cold fronts. But sometimes that river of air gets kinked.
Like a garden hose?
Sort of, yeah. It bends into a massive, pronounced ridge. Think of it like a giant uppercase letter omega.
Right, which we call an omega block in forecasting. And when the jet stream loops that far north, say, all the way up into central Canada, it leaves this vast area of the United States just cut off from the main flow.
Exactly. Yes, it gets completely cut off. And the space underneath that massive ridge gets filled by a deep, upper-level high-pressure system.
Okay.
And high pressure, fundamentally, is characterized by sinking air. The air is physically heavier, is denser, so it descends toward the surface of the Earth.
Wait, if the high pressure is pushing air down and making it hot, why doesn't the heat just eventually, bounce back up? Like, what's physically keeping it trapped there, preventing it from just dispersing back into the upper atmosphere?
Well, that comes down to a process called adiabatic compression.
Adiabatic compression.
Right. As that air sinks from the upper levels of the troposphere, say 20,000 feet up, down toward the surface, the atmospheric pressure around it actually increases.
Because it's getting lower in the atmosphere.
Yes. The molecules in that sinking parcel of air are being squeezed together. And when a gas is compressed, the kinetic energy of those molecules increases as they bounce off each other more frequently.
Okay, I follow.
And that kinetic energy translates directly into heat.
Oh, so if you've ever manually pumped up a bicycle tire with a hand pump, you've felt this in action.
Yes. That's the perfect way to look at it.
You pump vigorously for a minute, and the metal base of the pump gets physically hot to the touch. That isn't friction from the handle sliding up and down. That is the air molecules inside the cylinder generating heat as they're squeezed into a tighter space.
Right.
Now you take that bicycle pump and scale it up to the size of the entire eastern seaboard of the United States.
And that immense scale is what creates the dome effect. This sinking, compressing, superheated air acts like an invisible heavy lid over the entire region.
Just clamping down on everything.
Yeah, it traps the heat near the surface. And more importantly, it creates a powerful barrier that prevents any cooler marine air from the Atlantic or cooler air from higher altitudes from mixing in.
So it's just a multi-day thermal feedback loop.
Yeah, it just feeds on itself.
The July sun, which is, at its highest and most intense angle of the year anyway, bakes the concrete and the asphalt.
Right.
The ground heats the air right above it. That hot surface air tries to rise, but it hits that high-pressure lid, gets shoved back down, compresses further, and gets even hotter.
And we can actually quantify just how extreme that air mass was before it even interacted with the ground. Because as meteorologists, we don't just look at surface temperatures.
We look higher up.
Yeah, we look at the 850 millibar level.
I want to pause on this, actually, because the 850 millibar level is a crucial metric for us, but it probably sounds like total jargon to anyone outside of a weather office.
Sure, yeah.
Why do we care so much about what the temperature is roughly 5,000 feet up when, every single person listening to this deep dive is living down here on the surface?
Well, we rely on the 850 millibar level because it sits just above what we call the planetary boundary layer.
Okay.
Down here on the surface, the air is messy, it's turbulent, it's scraping against skyscrapers, mountains, and forests.
Right, there's so much interference.
It is drastically influenced by whether the sun is shining on asphalt versus a grassy park, and it swings wildly between daytime heating and nighttime cooling.
It's noisy data.
It's highly localized noise. But when you go up to 5,000 feet, you escape all that surface friction and localized heating. You get a pure, unadulterated read on the true thermodynamic character of the air mass itself.
The baseline, basically.
Yeah. And during the July 2026 event, the temperatures at the 850 millibar level were 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above normal.
Wow. So the air mass itself, before the sun even had a chance to supercharge it down on the pavement, was fundamentally overheated.
Yes.
And when you have an anomaly that severe aloft, it just translates to apocalyptic temperatures at the surface.
And the sheer geographical footprint was staggering. We had somewhere between 150 to over 200 million Americans under some form of extreme heat alert leading into the 4th of July weekend.
That is easily more than half the population of the United States trapped inside a single atmospheric pressure cooker.
Yeah, it stretched from the Great Plains through the Midwest, across the Ohio Valley, and draped itself entirely over the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast.
And the raw surface numbers from that weekend read like a worst-case climate modeling scenario.
They really did. Atlantic City, New Jersey, right on the ocean where you would normally expect a sea breeze to provide relief, they hit 105 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right on the water?
Yeah, that marked the second hottest day in their entire recorded history.
And Newark also hit 105. Up in New England, Boston hit 100 degrees. And, 100 degrees might not sound like a civilization-ending number to someone listening in Texas or Arizona, but for Boston, with its strong maritime influence, it is incredibly rare.
Very rare.
This was only the 29th time in Boston's entire recorded history that they hit the century mark.
And Philadelphia tied a daily record at 103 degrees. They endured this punishing streak of consecutive 100-plus degree days that taxed their urban infrastructure to the absolute limit.
But Washington, D.C. really became the focal point, not just because of the massive crowds for America 250, but because of the sheer historical weight of the records they were breaking.
What's fascinating here is just how old some of these records were.
Right. D.C. officially hit 102 degrees, which tied a daily record that had stood since 1919. Out at BWI Marshall Airport in Baltimore, they hit 102, which broke a record that had stood since 1898.
I think we need to contextualize what breaking an 1898 record or tying a 1919 record actually means in modern urban climatology.
Let's do that. Because a lot of people will look at those dates, 1919, 1898, and say, well, it was just as hot over 100 years ago. This is just a normal cycle.
Right. But when you look at 1919, Washington, D.C. was a fundamentally different landscape. The ratio of green space and natural soil to pavement was vastly higher.
Oh, sure.
Today, we have engineered an environment of immense thermal mass. We have laid down millions of tons of asphalt, concrete, steel, and glass.
All the things that absorb heat.
Yeah, these materials are incredibly efficient at absorbing shortwave solar radiation during the day and holding onto it.
The urban heat island effect.
Yes. So when DC hits 102 degrees today, it is far more dangerous than 102 degrees in 1919 because the concrete jungle prevents the city from cooling off when the sun goes down.
And this brings us to a massive, insidious danger of heat domes that often gets buried under the flashy daytime high temperatures. The real lethal factor in a prolonged heat wave is what happens, or rather what fails to happen overnight.
We saw overnight lows in dense urban corridors like DC, Philadelphia, and New York City, struggling to drop below 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. New York City actually set a milestone for the hottest midnight temperature on record during this stretch.
Why is that lack of nighttime cooling so catastrophic for the human body? Like, if you're out of the direct sun, shouldn't you be safe?
Normally, even on a scorching summer day, the cooler night air acts as a critical biological reset button. The ambient temperature drops, which allows your cardiovascular system to rest.
Right.
Your core body temperature lowers, and your sweat glands get a chance to recover and replenish.
But when it's 80 degrees at 3 a.m.,
Your body remains in a continuous active state of thermal regulation. Your heart is still pumping faster to push blood to the surface of your skin. You are still losing fluids and electrolytes through insensible perspiration.
it's constantly working.
Yeah, and when you string 2, 3, or 4 of these nights together without relief, the cumulative cardiovascular stress builds exponentially. This is when we see spikes in catastrophic organ failure, particularly in the elderly, infants, and those with pre-existing heart or kidney conditions.
And that thermal regulation relies heavily on one specific biological mechanism, which brings us to the second, perhaps most crucial component of this event.
The humidity.
Right. This heat dome wasn't just trapping temperature, it was acting as a vacuum for an incredible amount of moisture.
The atmospheric circulation around this massive high-pressure system features a clockwise flow of air. And because of where this high was positioned, that clockwise flow is acting like a giant atmospheric water pump.
So it's just pulling water vapor from the south?
It dredged up deep, rich tropical moisture straight out of the Gulf of Mexico, carrying it north across the deep south and funneling it directly into the mid-Atlantic and northeast.
Which introduces everyone's least favorite meteorological metric, the heat index.
Okay.
We hear the phrase constantly, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. But let's get into the cellular physiology here. Why does the humidity matter so much? Why is a 95-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona fundamentally a different biological experience than a 95-degree day in Washington, D.C. during this event?
It all comes down to evaporative cooling, which is the primary defense mechanism the human body possesses against extreme heat.
Okay.
When your internal core temperature begins to rise, your brain signals the eccrine glands in your skin to produce sweat. But the physical presence of water on your skin doesn't cool you down on its own.
Right. If you just spray yourself with room temperature water, it feels wet, but it doesn't dramatically drop your body heat.
Exactly, because the cooling effect only happens through a phase change. It takes energy to convert a liquid into a gas. When the sweat on your skin evaporates into the surrounding air, it absorbs heat energy directly from your body to fuel that phase change.
That makes sense.
That removal of heat energy is what lowers your skin temperature, which in turn cools the blood circulating just beneath the surface, which then cycles back to cool your vital organs.
It's an incredibly elegant, organic air conditioning system, but there is a massive catch.
The catch is that evaporation requires the surrounding atmosphere to have the physical capacity to absorb that moisture.
I always think of the atmosphere like a kitchen sponge.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, if you have a dry sponge, you can wipe up a huge spill on the counter easily. That's a dry heat in Arizona. You know, your sweat evaporates instantly into the dry air. But if you try to wipe up a spill with a sponge that is already 100% saturated with water, it just smears the spill around. The sponge can't take in another drop.
That is the perfect analogy for a high dew point environment. During the July 2026 event, the dew points, the absolute measure of moisture in the air, were pushing into the mid to upper 70s.
Which is just soupy.
Yeah, the relative humidity was oppressive. The atmospheric sponge was full. So you sweat profusely, but the sweat simply sits there on your skin, dripping off you without evaporating.
The air physically cannot hold any more water vapor. So your body's natural air conditioning system essentially shorts out. Your brain realizes you are still getting hotter, so it commands the heart to pump even harder, pushing more blood to the surface of the skin to try and shed the heat. But the skin isn't cooling.
Right, and your core temperature continues to rise and your fluid levels plummet. This physiological reality is why the National Weather Service utilizes the heat index and more recently the heat risk product.
Can you explain the difference real quick?
Sure. The heat index is a complex mathematical calculation that factors in both the ambient air temperature and the relative humidity to determine the apparent aperture, what it actually feels like to the human body. And during the 4th of July weekend, those heat indices were staggering. We were seeing widespread forecasts of 110 to 115 degrees across the Mid-Atlantic and East Coast. In D.C., the index hit 111. In Philadelphia, it reached 110.
Just incredible number.
And the NOAA Heat Risk product, which maps out the threat to human health by factoring in how unusual the heat is for a specific location at that time of year, well, it had vast swaths of the country painted in the rare magenta extreme risk categories.
Which brings up a question, and I want to push back a little on how people perceive this. Because people often think feeling hot is just an uncomfortable part of summer. Like, I'll just drink some water and tough it out. At what exact point does the human body cross the threshold from being uncomfortably hot to entering a genuine life-threatening medical emergency?
It's a great question, because the line between heat exhaustion and heat stroke is razor thin, and crossing it can become fatal in a matter of minutes.
Let's break down this physiological progression deeply, because anyone planning to attend a massive outdoor event like the America 250 celebrations needs to understand the warning signs in themselves and in the people around them.
Well, the progression typically begins with heat cramps. These are painful muscle spasms, usually in the legs or abdomen, caused by the rapid loss of salt and water through heavy sweating.
The body's early warning system flashing yellow, basically.
Yeah. And if you don't heed that warning, you escalate to heat exhaustion.
What is happening internally at the heat exhaustion stage?
Your body is struggling to maintain its blood pressure because your blood vessels are massively dilated at the surface of your skin to shed heat, and because you are losing blood volume through sweat, your blood pressure just drops.
So what does that look like from the outside?
The symptoms become very pronounced. You see heavy, uncontrollable sweating, severe weakness or fatigue. The pulse becomes very fast, but weak. The skin often becomes cool, pale, and incredibly clammy. You might feel dizzy, nauseous, or develop a pounding headache.
But the key distinction at the heat exhaustion stage is that the body's thermoregulatory system is still somewhat functional, right?
Yes, you are still sweating. The body is still trying to fight back. The necessary treatment is immediate. Get the person into a shaded, air-conditioned space, have them lie down with their legs elevated to help blood flow back to the heart, and slowly introduce cool water or electrolyte fluids.
But what happens if you ignore those signs? Or, more relevant to the National Mall on July 4th, what if you are stuck in a massive crowd of 100,000 people and you physically cannot escape the heat? You cross the threshold into heat stroke.
And heat stroke is a catastrophic failure of the body's entire temperature control center, which is located in a part of the brain called the hypothalamus.
So the brain just can't regulate anymore.
Right. When you cross into heat stroke, the hypothalamus essentially crashes.
This is a 9/11 lights and sirens medical emergency.
Absolutely. Sweating often stops completely, which is terrifying because it means the body has given up trying to cool itself. The skin becomes hot, flush, red, and dangerously dry.
Though it's worth noting that if it's caused by intense exertion, like running a race, the skin can sometimes remain damp, right?
Yes, exertional heat stroke can present with damp skin. But the pulse shifts from being weak to being rapid and extremely strong as the heart works frantically in a last-ditch effort.
The core body temperature just skyrockets, often blowing past 103, 104, or even 105 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, the proteins in your cells literally begin to denature, they start cooking. But the most alarming symptom is an altered mental status.
Yeah, we see severe confusion, slurred speech, delirium, agitation, or the person simply losing consciousness entirely. The brain is overheating and neurological function is degrading rapidly.
If someone is exhibiting these signs, the treatment protocol flips completely, doesn't it?
It does, and this is where many well-intentioned bystanders make a fatal mistake. If you suspect someone has heat stroke, you do not give them anything to drink.
See, that feels incredibly counterintuitive. Your instinct is to force a bottle of water into their hands.
The instinct is strong, yeah. But because their mental state is altered and their central nervous system is impaired, giving them fluids creates a severe choking and aspiration hazard that could literally drown fluid into their lungs.
Wow. So what do you do instead?
The singular focus must be on rapid, aggressive external cooling while waiting for paramedics.
How aggressive?
As aggressive as possible. Ice water immersion, if a tub is available. If not, packing cold, wet towels and ice packs directly onto the neck, the groin, and the armpits.
Why those specific areas? Like, why the neck and groin?
because those are areas where major blood vessels, the jugular, the femoral, and the axillary arteries, are located very close to the surface of the skin. By chilling the blood in those massive arteries, you are sending a stream of cooled blood back into the body's core, forcing the internal temperature down manually because the hypothalamus can no longer do it.
The stakes here really cannot be overstated. We have to look at the grim historical context. Heat is the deadliest weather-related hazard in the United States.
Bar none.
It is a silent, invisible killer. It doesn't rip roofs off houses like a tornado, it doesn't wash away bridges like a flood, and it doesn't command the dramatic satellite imagery of a Category 5 hurricane, so it doesn't always evoke the same visceral, immediate fear. But the death toll eclipses all of them. Heat kills more people annually than tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, and winter storms combined.
And the data from the CDC confirms this trajectory. Since 2018, there have been over 13,000 heat-related deaths in the U.S.
Just a staggering number.
And it is a global crisis. We've seen reports of recent heat waves in Europe where more than 1,000 people died in France alone over a short period, completely overwhelming mortuary services in Paris.
So if we understand the cellular physiology of how heat shuts down the human body, and we know the heat index is approaching 111 degrees, what happens when you cram 500,000 of those overheating, fragile human bodies onto the National Mall with almost zero natural shade?
You are engineering a mass casualty incident waiting to happen. Emergency managers were faced with an impossible logistical nightmare. Washington, D.C. became ground zero. It was the epicenter, where the immovable object of Mother Nature collided with the unstoppable force of the America 250 celebrations.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because let's put ourselves on the ground in D.C. that Friday. The city is under an extreme heat alert activated by Mayor Muriel Bowser. The forecast called for 4 consecutive days of 100-degree heat, peaking right as the largest crowds in a decade descended on the city.
Right, and the focal point of the daytime festivities was the Great American State Fair on the National Mall.
So imagine standing out there. You have a massive Ferris wheel, sprawling food vendor tents, multiple performance stages, and tens of thousands of people walking around.
With no real shelter.
The National Mall is mostly grass and gravel pathways, but it is surrounded by the massive thermal mass of the Smithsonian museums, the paved avenues, and the concrete monuments. The ambient temperature is baking at 102 degrees. The heat index is 111.
The human toll was instantaneous. DC fire and EMS crews found themselves operating in a state of continuous triage.
I can't even imagine the strain on those paramedics.
On Friday alone, they treated 44 patients directly on the National Mall, transporting 11 of them to local hospitals, with multiple cases categorized as serious.
We are talking about tourists collapsing in the security lines, older folks passing out waiting for food, children suffering from heat exhaustion near the Ferris wheel.
The situation deteriorated so rapidly that the organizers, Freedom 250, along with the National Park Service and the Secret Service, had to make a drastic call.
What did they do?
They made the unprecedented decision to abruptly close the Great American State Fair right in the middle of the day.
They literally got on the loudspeaker, shut down the fair, and told tens of thousands of tourists to immediately leave the mall and seek air-conditioned shelter. They pushed the reopening to 5:00 p.m., hoping the lower sun angle would provide a margin of safety.
And the cascading cancellations began to ripple up and down the East Coast as local governments realized the liability and the danger.
The dominoes fell fast. The historic Independence Day parade in Washington, D.C., a staple scheduled for Saturday morning, was outright canceled by the National Park Service.
Yeah, and up in Philadelphia, the literal birthplace of the nation, they had to alter their Salute to Independence parade.
I read they shortened the route by a full mile just to get the participants, the marching bands in heavy uniforms, out of the heat faster. They even had to move parts of a massive FIFA World Cup fan festival indoors into air-conditioned tents.
But retreating indoors assumes that the indoor spaces remain cool. And that brings us to the severe strain on the infrastructure itself.
Right.
When 150 million people retreat inside and turn their air conditioners to maximum at the exact same time, the electricity demand spikes to historic levels.
The power grid was arguably the primary infrastructural concern that weekend. The Department of Energy had to step in and issue emergency orders to bring additional power plants online in the Mid-Atlantic just to handle the massive baseload demand.
They had to spin up what we call peaker plants.
What exactly is a peaker plant, for those who aren't familiar with grid operations?
Most of the time, the power grid relies on highly efficient baseload power. That's your nuclear, large-scale natural gas, hydro, and renewable.
The steady stuff.
Right. But during extreme demand spikes, when the grid frequency threatens to dip and cause cascading blackouts, grid operators have to call on peaker plants. These are typically older, much less efficient natural gas or oil-fired plants.
They are more expensive to run and emit significantly more pollutants.
Yes, they're normally kept offline for exactly those reasons. But during a severe heat dome, the alternative is rolling blackouts. And if the AC stops working across a major metropolitan area with a 111-degree heat index, you transition very quickly from an infrastructure crisis to a mass casualty catastrophe.
So we saw political leaders resorting to desperate public pleas. New York Governor Kathy Hochul went on television urging all residents across the state to proactively conserve electricity by setting their thermostats between 75 and 78 degrees.
Which for a lot of people feels uncomfortably warm.
Yeah, it does, but it drastically reduces the draw on the grid.
And in some places, even voluntary conservation wasn't enough to balance the load.
Right. Con Edison, the power company that serves New York City, had to preemptively shut off electricity to nearly 10,000 customers in the borough of Queens.
They cited an equipment problem caused by the extreme heat and heavy demand, which essentially means they had to cut off a specific neighborhood to save a substation or wider grid sector from a catastrophic failure.
Imagine you were one of those 10,000 people. You live in a brick apartment building in Queens. It feels like 106 degrees in your living room. You're trying to keep your kids or your elderly parents cool. And suddenly your fan stops spinning, the AC cuts out, and the fridge goes dark.
It's terrifying.
That's not just an inconvenience. That is a sudden, terrifying survival situation.
It perfectly illustrates the sheer fragility of our urban infrastructure when it is exposed to these upper percentile climate extremes. We build our cities for the averages, not the extremes.
I mean, New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani also begged residents to stay inside, and he actually injected a bit of much-needed levity into the dire emergency warnings. He told New Yorkers to stay inside and stay cool, adding that even if you were lucky enough to be attending the massive Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce wedding at Madison Square Garden that weekend, you should stay inside.
Yeah, that was wild.
It was a funny moment of pop culture mixed with serious emergency management, but the underlying message was grim. Do not go outside.
Because beyond the electrical grid, the physical transportation infrastructure was literally warping under the sun.
This is one of the wildest details from the weekend to me. Amtrak had to cancel over 24 trains in the busy Northeast corridor right in the middle of the holiday travel rush. And the reason? Heat kinks.
Also known as sun kinks. This is a fascinating problem of metallurgy and thermodynamics.
Let's get into that.
Okay, so modern railway tracks are often made of continuous welded rail, or CWR. Instead of having small gaps between the segments like the old jointed rails, which gives you that classic clickety-clack sound, CWR is welded into long, continuous ribbons for a smoother, faster ride.
But steel has a coefficient of thermal expansion.
Yes. When you expose steel to intense, direct solar radiation in 105-degree ambient air, the atoms within the metal gain kinetic energy and vibrate more vigorously.
As they vibrate, they push slightly further apart. On a microscopic scale, it's imperceptible. But when you multiply that expansion over miles of continuous steel rail, the track literally has to grow.
And if it has nowhere to expand lengthwise, the immense compressive stress builds up until the track violently buckles sideways, creating a dangerous kink.
And if a high-speed train hits that kink, you have a catastrophic derailment.
Exactly. To combat this, transit agencies have to employ creative engineering. The Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority actually went out and painted over 6,000 feet of their exposed rail tracks with reflective white paint.
It's the albedo effect in action. Dark steel absorbs almost all the shortwave solar radiation hitting it, converting it into heat. The white paint reflects a massive percentage of that radiation back into the atmosphere, lowering the physical temperature of the steel tracks just enough to keep them within their thermal tolerance and prevent them from warping.
It's a brilliant, remarkably low-tech adaptation to a high-tech infrastructure failure.
But as oppressive and disruptive as the heat on the ground was, the meteorological setup was quietly brewing an entirely different, incredibly violent hazard in the sky above.
And that caught a lot of people off guard.
Let's talk about the sky, because this is where I think a lot of people get deeply confused. If there's a massive, oppressive, blocking high-pressure system sitting over the East Coast, acting like a heavy lid, pushing air down and clearing out the clouds, how on earth are we getting violent thunderstorms? Doesn't high pressure usually guarantee clear, sunny skies?
It's a very logical question, and it highlights the volatile, energetic nature of the atmosphere on the periphery of a heat dome.
Okay, explain that.
You are correct that the center of the high pressure suppresses widespread cloud formation. But the incredible amount of heat and humidity accumulating at the surface day after day creates a massive reservoir of energy. We measure this energy as convective available potential energy, or CAPE.
Let's break down Cape E because we use that term a lot when we cover severe weather.
Think of CAPE as atmospheric buoyancy. Warm, moist air is naturally less dense than cold, dry air, so that superheated, humid air at the surface desperately wants to rise, much like a hot air balloon wants to float upward.
Right.
The greater the temperature difference between the hot surface air and the cooler air high up in the atmosphere, the faster and more violently that air wants to accelerate upward.
So you have this massive amount of potential energy, literally rocket fuel for thunderstorms, just sitting at the surface. Why doesn't it just constantly bubble up into storms all day?
Because of the cap. Remember that sinking, compressing air from the high-pressure system?
Yeah, the lid.
It creates a layer of warm air aloft, known as a subsidence inversion. This inversion acts like a physical barrier, a lid that prevents the buoyant surface air from rising.
But every lid has a breaking point.
And if the surface heating becomes so intense that the rising air finally gets hot enough to punch through that inversion layer, all of that pent-up energy is released explosively.
Or, what usually happens on the edges, a smaller weather system triggers it.
Right. If a small upper-level atmospheric disturbance, a short wave, rides along the outer edge of the heat dome where the cap is weaker, it provides the necessary lift to break the lid.
We call these ridge-riding storm clusters, or sometimes we refer to this setup as the ring of fire pattern. You have this massive dome of clear, hot air and violently rotating supercells and squall lines traveling along the periphery, feeding on that extreme heat and humidity like a parasite. And on the afternoon and evening of July 4th, that ring of fire took aim directly at the mid-Atlantic.
The timing could not have been worse for the America 250 events.
The National Weather Service in Sterling, Virginia, had to issue severe thunderstorm watches for a massive chunk of the region, including the entire D.C. metro area, encompassing nearly 13 million people.
And the threat matrix they were forecasting wasn't just a brief, cooling summer shower. They were tracking a volatile squall line capable of producing scattered wind gusts up to 75 to 80 miles per hour.
Which is hurricane force.
Yeah, plus isolated ping-pong ball-sized hail and frequent, intense cloud-to-ground lightning.
So put yourself in the shoes of an emergency manager in D.C. at that moment. You've got hundreds of thousands of people on the National Mall. They have been baking in 100-degree heat all day. Their bodies are stressed. The medical tents are already full. And now your radar shows a wall of storms packing hurricane-force wind gusts bearing down on those open fields.
It's a nightmare scenario.
There is no cover. There is no protection.
The evacuation order had to be given, and it had to be executed flawlessly.
Visitors at the National Mall were suddenly told over the massive PA systems to immediately seek shelter. Park rangers, D.C. Metro Police, and law enforcement started directing massive, exhausted crowds off the grass and into the sturdy federal buildings lining the mall.
Places like the Ronald Reagan Building, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Agriculture.
The visual of that evacuation must have been surreal. And this happened right before President Trump was scheduled to deliver his highly anticipated speech commemorating the 250th anniversary, and just hours before the massive orchestrated fireworks display.
And it wasn't just D.C. getting hit. The day before, out in South Dakota, President Trump's speech at Mount Rushmore was significantly delayed when severe storms suddenly flared up.
That's right, they got hit too.
Dropping ping-pong-sized hail and forcing attendees to run for cover. It was an equal opportunity weather disruption across the country.
And to compound the misery in D.C., the atmospheric stagnation caused by the heat dome had trapped more than just heat and moisture. It trapped all the urban pollutants, the vehicle exhaust from thousands of idling cars, and the lingering smoke from early, localized fireworks displays.
Because the air wasn't mixing, all those particulates were just pinned near the surface. The D.C. area was placed under a Code Purple air quality alert.
Code Purple, meaning the air is fundamentally unhealthy for everyone, regardless of age, health, or pre-existing respiratory conditions. The ozone levels were off the charts.
It is the definition of a compounding environmental disaster. You are running for cover from 80-mile-per-hour winds and lightning. It feels like 111 degrees. Your body is on the verge of heat exhaustion, and every breath you take is filled with stagnant, toxic particulates that inflame your lungs.
So what does this all mean? When extreme weather disrupts human life on a historic scale, Humans inevitably react. Sometimes we react by inventing new technologies to adapt and survive, but sometimes we react by seeking out alternative narratives to explain the chaos.
And when an event is this disruptive, especially one that impacts a highly symbolic and politicized celebration like America's 250th, the psychological response is fascinating.
Hmm?
People naturally search for agency.
Right.
They want someone or something to blame, rather than accepting the blind, indifferent physics of the atmosphere.
We saw this sociological phenomenon play out in real time across social media platforms. A post from right-wing activist Kylie Jane Cromer went massively viral during the weekend's chaos. She claimed that the extreme heat and the violent storms in D.C. were deliberately geoengineered by someone suffering from Trump derangement syndrome.
Right, and the specific claim proliferating online was that bad actors had intentionally manipulated the weather to ruin the president's celebratory event. The viral post also alleged that Trump's inauguration had been similarly geoengineered to be artificially cold for the exact same reasons.
And to be clear to our listeners, we are discussing this not to take political sides, but to neutrally examine how weather misinformation proliferates during high-stress extreme events. When people are scared, uncomfortable, or angry about a disrupted national celebration, a narrative that offers a clear villain can be very appealing. It provides a sense of order to the chaos.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a long documented history of weather modification theories capturing the public imagination, and they usually stem from a very small kernel of historical truth.
Like military operations.
Yes. For example, the U.S. military actually did conduct Operation Popeye during the Vietnam War, which used cloud seeding to try to increase rainfall over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We also had Project Storm Fury in the mid-20th century, which experimented with dropping silver iodide into hurricanes to try and weaken them.
But there is a massive, insurmountable leap in physics between seeding a localized thunderstorm to squeeze out a bit more rain and artificially generating a multi-state heat dome that raises the 850 millibar temperatures by 15 degrees Celsius across half a continent.
The leap isn't just large, it defies the laws of thermodynamics. To create or sustain a blocking high-pressure system of the magnitude we saw in July 2026, you would need an incomprehensible amount of energy.
Just astronomical amounts.
The thermal energy required to heat that volume of air across the eastern two-thirds of the United States would be equivalent to detonating thousands of nuclear weapons simultaneously. It is orders of magnitude beyond any human technology, secret or otherwise.
And NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the EPA have had to consistently issue public statements addressing these claims. They clearly state that the government does not and cannot control extreme weather events like heat waves, hurricanes, or severe squall lines.
They are entirely natural phenomena.
Right, driven by massive global oceanic and atmospheric circulations, like the transition from an El Niño pronounced El Niño pattern to a La Niña pronounced La Niña.
Yet the belief in large-scale weather control is becoming increasingly mainstream. According to recent reports, nearly 20 state legislatures have actually proposed or passed laws attempting to ban weather modification or geoengineering over their airspace.
It shows how deeply these theories have penetrated the public consciousness, shaping actual legislative policy regardless of the scientific consensus.
It's a fascinating look into how we process trauma and disruption.
It really is. But while some focus on geoengineering narratives, there are actual, tangible, brilliant technologies we are engineering right now to adapt to and survive this escalating heat. Because air conditioning is great, but central air is incredibly expensive to install. It strains the baseload grid, and those older, rattling window units we all had in college are horribly inefficient.
Which is why we are currently seeing a massive surge in interest and investment surrounding window heat pumps.
I want to dive into the thermodynamics of this because it feels like a potential game changer, especially for renters or people living in older historic homes without central air ductwork. How exactly does a modern window heat pump differ from that loud, dripping box I used to have hanging out of my dorm window?
Well, traditional window AC units use a basic refrigeration cycle. They use a compressor and refrigerant to absorb heat from the air inside your room and exhaust it outside.
Like a refrigerator.
Right. But they only work in one direction. A window heat pump incorporates a reversing valve.
A reversing valve, meaning it can run the cycle backward.
Precisely. In the summer, it operates exactly like an AC, pulling heat out of your house. But in the winter, the valve flips the flow of the refrigerant. The system extracts ambient heat energy from the outside air, even when it feels freezing cold outside, and pumps that heat indoors.
Wait, I want to clarify this for the listener because this is where the physics seem like magic. How can a machine extract heat from the air outside if it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit out there?
It's because of the specific refrigerants used in the coils. These refrigerants have exceptionally low boiling points. Even at 20 degrees Fahrenheit, there is still thermal energy in the air. The extremely cold liquid refrigerant in the outdoor coil absorbs that ambient heat and turns into a gas. The compressor then squeezes that gas, which drastically raises its temperature.
Hey, adiabatic compression from earlier.
Yes, good catch. And that superheated gas is pumped inside to warm your room.
So it is literally moving existing heat from outside to inside. It doesn't generate heat by burning fossil fuels like a gas furnace or by using electrical resistance like a space heater.
And that is what makes them highly efficient, because moving heat requires significantly less electricity than creating heat. And unlike a whole house split system that requires professional HVAC contractors drilling holes through your exterior walls and can cost upwards of $10,000 to $15,000, these new packaged window heat pumps are entirely self-contained.
You can theoretically install them yourself, plug them into a standard 120-volt wall outlet, and when your apartment leases up, you take it out of the window and bring it to your next place.
And they currently cost around $3,000 to $4,000. That isn't pocket change by any means, but it's a fraction of the cost of a full central system upgrade.
But let me ask the obvious question. If they are so thermodynamically brilliant, so efficient, and you can just plug them into a wall outlet, why isn't every renter in America using one right now? What is the catch?
There are significant technological and practical limitations right now. The first is raw capacity. A whole house heat pump might have a heating capacity of 60,000 BTUs. A window unit, constrained by its physical size and the power limit of a standard wall outlet, maxes out around 12,000 BTUs.
That's small.
Yeah, they're designed to heat or cool a single well-insulated room. They cannot handle a whole house or a large open-concept apartment.
So if you have a 3-bedroom apartment, you're buying 3 of these units, and suddenly that initial cost savings completely vanishes.
Additionally, their efficiency plummets when the outside temperature gets extremely cold. While they can pull heat from 20-degree air, the data shows that when the outdoor temperature drops to minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit, their heating output drops to nearly half.
Oh, wow.
And their coefficient of performance, their efficiency falls to 1/3 of its rated performance.
So they struggle in deep, prolonged freezes because there is simply less thermal energy available to extract, and the compressor has to work incredibly hard to squeeze out whatever heat is left.
So while they are a brilliant, necessary adaptation for surviving the brutal summer heat domes in urban environments, they are not yet a standalone silver bullet for a North Dakota or Minnesota winter.
They are a tool in the toolbox, but it shows how our physical built environment is having to rapidly shift. As the baseline temperatures of our summers continue to push higher, our architecture and our personal cooling technologies will have to evolve. We're actively transitioning from a world where air conditioning was considered a luxury comfort to a world where it is a fundamental, non-negotiable life support system.
Which leaves us with a lingering, almost philosophical question to consider regarding our culture.
Yes, and I want everyone listening to really think about what this means for the next decade. If these sprawling, immovable heat domes are going to become a more frequent and more intense feature of our climate, what happens to the classic American summer?
It's a tough thing to consider.
Will our massive outdoor traditions, the daytime July 4th parades, the sprawling county fairs, the afternoon baseball games, and outdoor stadium concerts, will they have to permanently shift?
It's an adaptation we may be forced into. Are we looking at a near future where Independence Day is celebrated entirely at night once the sun finally sets? Or where our grand outdoor traditions are eventually forced indoors entirely, enclosed in heavily air-conditioned stadiums and massive convention centers?
It would represent a profound, fundamental shift in how we experience our own culture, our holidays, and our relationship with nature itself. We want to hear what you think about this. Are you already changing how you spend your summers? Make sure you follow Rob Jones on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook to keep the conversation going. Drop a comment on the latest post, let us know your thoughts on the future of summer, and please take a second to rate and follow this deep dive on whatever app you're using right now. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives into the science of our atmosphere. You've been listening to Meteorology Matters, created by meteorologist Rob Jones. Thanks for listening, and remember, meteorology always matters.